During the trial, he launched into a rant that you can read online, and it said, F the BNP, F Theresa May, you are all white bastards, we are the supreme race. During the trial, and then smiled as he was sentenced.
Rather than blame certain problems with social cohesion on the fact that these people have been, these sort of foreign subcultures have been imported at scale and are causing all sorts of social cohesion problems, rather than blame the immigrant populations themselves, and rather than blame the people responsible for bringing them here, it has become the tendency of our political class not only to externalize the cost of immigration onto other people, but to blame people like Connor, like Lewis, like you.
Because of those decades of mass migration and what Eric Kaufman, the previous guest, calls unilateral multiculturalism, where multiculturalism is imposed on the host population, so we have to accommodate these tribal subcultures, but allows our parliamentary democracy to be hijacked by those sectarian tribal subcultures who vote as ethnic and religious blocs. Now those councils are packed with people who share ethnic and religious solidarity, and our parliament, with the election of 4 sectarian MPs, members of councils and members of parliament who share ethnic and religious solidarity with the perpetrators.
If this is to be part of a proper deportation plan of illegal immigrants, we need to recognise that the Home Office can't do this alone. There needs to be a big push, a big public awareness push on current mechanisms that the public have access to report those that they suspect to be working illegally or those to be residing in the country.
Welcome back to Deprogram, the NCF show where we do our best to fight back against the forces of ideological conformity, especially among the young. My name is Harrison Pitt. I'm a contributing editor at the European Conservative magazine, and I'm thrilled to be joined today, as ever, by Connor Tomlinson, one of the leading contributors at Courage Media, and our special guest this week, none other than Rob Bates, close friend of the channel, and from the Centre for Migration Control. Rob, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming back again on the show. It's good to have you here. So, we'll dive in with a scoop that we owe to Connor and to our mutual friend Lewis Brackpool of late, which revealed that in West Yorkshire, in all of the sort of major regions of the major precincts of West Yorkshire police revealed that South Asian men are around 3 to 4 times as likely to be engaged in the grooming and sexual exploitation of children as the host population in Britain. And this was data that's very up to date. It's from between, I believe, Connor, I'm right in saying 2009 to 2024.
Yes.
So this goes to show that it is an ongoing problem. It's not a dog whistle, as Lucy Powell recently said on the BBC's Any Questions, the leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell, the Labour's leader of the House of Commons. What struck me is that we're talking about a charge rate here of just 17.9%. That was also revealed in the details. And no, not a prosecution rate, but a charge rate of 17.9%, which really is piffling, particularly given the scale of the problem. Why do you think it is that the British state continues to fail, even now, after all of the scandals, to take this imported horror as seriously as they should?
Well, first of all, I think it's great work, and I think it's done a lot to actually highlight the problem that we are facing here and perhaps go some way to explain why the Labour government have been so weak when it comes to actually launching those national inquiries and have now subsequently rowed back on those local inquiries as well, which is that we know that those that are committing these crimes are disproportionately likely to come from this particular Asian Pakistani background. And we also know, on the other hand, that the Labour Party in many areas of the country are very reliant and increasingly reliant on that vote to keep many of their MPs, many senior MPs, in their seats as well. And I think that explains the silence, effectively, and lack of action. I think the reason why we have such little data is the kind of entrenched fear, the entrenched kind of counter-racism that we've seen over the last 20 years in the British state, whether it's police, councils, social services, to actually try and identify these patterns. Of course, when multiculturalism and mass migration first started and was first launched onto the scene, it was universal good. It was going to bring all kinds of joys, economic and social and cultural, to Britain, and therefore the actual need to measure and track and see whether we're achieving those KPIs was seen as redundant. It was taken for granted. It was a universal law that diversity is a strength, and therefore the need to actually process, whether it's by ethnicity or nationality, the statistics on those committing these crimes, and to actually pursue them and come up with more holistic strategy. Even still, many councils don't have proper, thorough strategies. They have kind of token strategies and kind of measures in place, but they don't do anywhere near enough to actually address these fundamental issues. I think Connors and Lewis have done a great job to bring to the fore.
Yes, it's interesting as well because they're also probably, I should imagine, seized by a good amount of inertia, helped along by a sort of sunk cost fallacy, which is we're waded so deep into the experiment that to row back now would be unthinkable, and so it becomes fashionable rather than blame certain problems with social cohesion on the fact that these people have been these sort of foreign subcultures have been imported at scale and are causing all sorts of social cohesion problems, rather than blame the immigrant populations themselves, and rather than blame the people responsible for bringing them here. It has become the tendency of our political class not only to externalize the cost of immigration onto other people, but to blame people like Connor, like Lewis, like you, like me, for stoking division and playing politics. Connor, you did a piece on this for Courage Media. Lewis Brackpool did a very good YouTube segment on it, which people should go and watch after they're finished watching this. What did you make of the revelations?
So I think it's very important to pick up on the fact that when we say that local councils do not often have a strategy, when we conceive of local councils, we often think of 60-year-old women giving up their time to be a parish councillor.
Yes.
Because of those decades of mass migration and what Eric Kaufman, previous guest, calls unilateral multiculturalism, where multiculturalism is imposed on the host population, so we have to accommodate these tribal subcultures, but allows our parliamentary democracy to be hijacked by those sectarian tribal subcultures who vote as ethnic and religious blocs. Now those councils are packed with people who share ethnic and religious solidarity, and our parliament, with the election of 4 sectarian MPs, members of councils and members of parliament who share ethnic and religious solidarity with the perpetrators. This sort of asabaya, this clannish mentality that keeps the conspiracy of silence within the communities, within the families. And so we can see from Bradford, for example, Bradford had 200 offences every year for multiple years. They had one of the lowest charging rates. And as Robbie Moore, the MP for Keighley, whose area overlaps with Bradford, has pointed out time and time again, on the same day that he held a Home Affairs Select Committee meeting with Professor Alexis Jay, who did the previous Rotherham inquiry, and she said that, Bradford don't want a national inquiry. They shot it down because they don't want to be another Rotherham. He's noted that this local council, which is dominated largely by people from this ethnic background, has time and time again shot down the potential for a nationally backed local inquiry, an independent inquiry into these sex offences, which are perpetrated by a factor of 2 to 4, and we didn't get exact breakdowns on the districts because West Yorkshire's police didn't provide it, but for all of the districts, 2 to 4 times the rate Pakistani men compared to their share of the population. And so part of the reason why we're not getting this is, yes, definitely the Lucy Powell effect, where they just dismiss it as a racist dog whistle, where they don't want to upset community tensions, or where, I think it was the Jay report, or it might have been the Casey report, where they said that they were so sensitive
Casey report, yes,
about upsetting the Pakistani community, they had to refer to taxi drivers as men of a certain heritage from a certain occupation, which is meaningless. Yes, there is that factor, but there's also the factor of the councillors or the MPs, like Ayub Khan themselves, who dismiss it as far-right and racist because it indicts their community and their religion.
Hello, please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we are far too willing to give that phenomenon the tools it needs to partake in that kind of tribal, as you say, cover-up as well. I think the mantra of integration and the extent to which it's been deployed, in particular with this one, and community tensions and the need to keep things stable has overridden common sense and the kind of empiricism that is really needed for proper public policy. We are perhaps on our side of the equation reluctant to engage with that kind of conversation, whereas those individuals, those councillors that you refer to, those from that community, are more than willing to weaponise it, more than willing to deploy it and to effectively use our liberal weakness, our limp-wristedness against us in this regard.
Absolutely. And so with respect to, before we get on to other potential solutions to this problem, which I think is important to talk about because many people feel a crushing sense of despair in this country, and it's I do think it's important to try and keep morale up as much as we can, consistent with being accurate about the state of the country, of course. Do you think that there should be a national inquiry of the sorts? One of the problems I have with the idea of a national inquiry is the fear that it would just become another talking shop, a way of pursuing a kind of ersatz form of reconciliation rather than there being a kind of legal follow through. I much prefer the idea of a tribunal, I must say, as opposed to an inquiry. Of course, maybe you have to inquire in order to do a tribunal. But another problem with these local council investigations just left to themselves is that they don't really have any kind of subpoena power. They don't have any kind of they're not put on any kind of statutory footing. All that aside, do you think that there should be a national inquiry, and what should its remit be, and how can we make sure that it isn't just a talking shop in the way that I fear it would become?
Well, I think you're right to have that fear. I think it is inevitable, given the way these things normally work, in that they would probably end up, to some extent, a whitewash. I think the importance of it is it becomes the kind of focal point for this conversation. It keeps it alive. I do think we also we have lessons to learn. We have systemic lessons to learn about the way social services, about the way the police and councils operate. And I do think that is something that the inquiry could at least help to achieve. I agree with you on the fact that, I'm past the point of just wanting lessons and wanting a few recommendations for government to implement. I think we kind of do need to see people hauled in front of judges and put behind bars a lot more stringently. I think we need a tribunal. I think we need a much more ferocious approach as well. I think there's room for both. I think we're seeing that at the moment. I think the work that Rupert Lowe's doing on the grooming gangs inquiry is fantastic, but we've also got Maggie Oliver doing her thing. We've got other efforts away as well. I think there is a need to build a whole ecosystem, really, just to pursue every nook and cranny and really, really go after every lesson that can be learned, and as well as prosecute it.
And to make sure that it's not that the job is not left to councils to mark their own homework, because they did an abysmal job on this. And if this is going to be put on a statutory footing, and if there is going to be the potential for kind of a prosecutorial follow-through, it's very important that no man is a judge in his own case. I mean, that is a fundamental principle of law that should apply here, if it is going to take more of a tribunal form than just a general, what lessons can we learn, truth and reconciliation, national inquiry form.
There's a few reasons why I think a national statutory inquiry is necessary. I think the efforts by today, as Charlie Peters of GB News and Adam Wren of Open Justice and a few other people have put out in a collaborative effort to document the 50 towns and cities where this has happened, the sort of ley lines of trafficking that often lead back to Bradford, shockingly, to compile all of the prosecutions that have happened with faces, who is and isn't out of prison. That's a great effort to put it in the public domain, as is Rupert Lowe's investigative effort and the sort of data gathering exercise that will be conducted with that privately funded inquiry, which could lead to being a sort of fact-finding mission to set the frames of reference for a judicial review, because Nigel Farage just suggested he didn't want to do a private inquiry. He preferred to do a judicial review, but you need to know the frames of reference for the judicial review to actually take action against people. But I think one of the reasons we need a national inquiry, one, the previous inquiries didn't assess this specific type of racially and religiously aggravated group-based child exploitation. The Casey report, for example, looked at things from sexual abuse in the church to historic abuse in care homes. The 2020 Home Office data gathering exercise was a proper whitewash, only mentioned the word Muslim, for example, once in reference to the Muslim Women's Network in a paper about how Pakistani girls are actually the most affected from this. Well, I found out in my data that Asian and Pakistani victims, despite obviously being 10% of the overall population, that's not broken down by gender, were only 2.96% of victims, despite being the largest single ethnic group and the largest collective ethnic group, Asian, of perpetrators. Previous inquiries, previous stats, other than work by the Quilliam Foundation or the National Crime Agency in 2023, just haven't put that out there. And so they haven't been able to successfully rebut the narrative. And the final point I will make, the only reason we're talking about this is because of social media. We did not have a national inquiry in the age of social media before. And I can guarantee you, if people slip up in front of cameras, they will be clipped, they will be fact-checked in real time, and this will be run round the clock. So I do think it's a necessary effort to clear the air and then set the frame of reference for who gets gone after by the law.
Could you think any state-sanctioned inquiry would have that frame of reference with the particular look at those communities that are disproportionately likely to affect? I just can't see. I'm so pessimistic about the kind of, as Houston said, the inertia and the fear of putting a foot wrong, that it wouldn't be defined in that way. And I think inevitably we'd end up with the church being explored and other lines as well. I think what it would at least provide, though, is a kind of a lodestar, a focal point for the work that is ongoing at the moment as well in the public sphere to continue to take place and have some greater relevance.
That's why I think that public work, it will and it needs to come first. So it could be the necessary catalyst to a national statutory inquiry with proper framing, But you can see how reluctant Labour are, not just from comments from Lucy Powell, but the fact that they have not delivered on their new Casey review. They're late. They haven't told us the 4 other places other than Oldham that are going to get central funding for a local-led non-statutory inquiry. They don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole while pretending that they do. So we need to keep the pressure up by hopefully putting stats out like this, Charlie Peters' work, Rupert Lowe's work, etc. It needs to be a combined effort to ensure that all of the momentum is flowing in the direction of transparency, truth, and justice.
Yes, also, there would be another angle for making sure that it did have this remit, which would be to maybe try and draw from some of the work that Laurie, I think he pronounces his name, Wastel, has been doing, pointing out how it's conspicuous, despite the fact that there is technically a right for prosecutors under the law to invoke a racially aggravated charge in order to make... So, for example, if I were to beat someone up at an ATM, I would get charged. If I were to rob someone at knife point at an ATM, I would get a certain charge if found by the law and prosecuted in a certain way. But if the prosecution team could prove that I did it because my victim, I was white and my victim was black,
as often happens,
as always happens. This is a perennial feature of British life these days, isn't it? Then I can technically a racially aggravated charge can be invoked, and maybe my sentence could go from 2 years to 7 years. Laurie has done good work pointing out how this is almost never invoked in the other way around. It's never used, despite the fact that we have on record many of these Pakistani rape and torture gangs saying they are engaging in precisely this form of child sexual exploitation because the victims are white kuffar. There's been a sort of conspicuous lack of interest on the part of prosecutors in this country to notice that fact and really to try and throw the book at them in ways that they can. So if you were to invoke sort of 2-tier practices in the justice system as a way of making sure that special attention is paid to that community as part of that remit, I would imagine it would enjoy huge public support, and it would be consistent with exactly the kind of grievances that people in this country are feeling at the moment. It wouldn't seem completely arbitrary and random.
Can I give a perfect example of this just beforehand? 2013, there was a Rochdale ringleader who was being prosecuted for child gang rape. During the trial, he launched into a rant that you can read online, and it said, F the BNP, F Theresa May, you are all white bastards, we are the supreme race, during the trial, and then smiled as he was sentenced. No additional racially aggravated charge slapped on by the judge during the hearing.
There you go. It's plain malpractice, and it's plain anti-white systemic bias. Not necessarily within the law, because the law technically leaves room open for it, but for the way in which the law is implied, the way in which the law is applied by our oligarchic judicial class, I suppose.
Do you think there's a need for another offence category as well? Because I don't know if when you've been looking into this, have found there isn't actually anything specifically identifying in law this particular type of crime. It's obviously often arrested by the police on those terms, but then when it comes to actually prosecuting and what the charge is, it often falls under a broader category, and therefore the data in many cases is lacking and gets lumped in with other things, or is actually then split between multiple different things as well. I think that's something that an inquiry should be looking at as well.
As far as I know, they've been breaking down the crimes into 2 types at the National Crime Agency in type 1 and A and type 2 grooming offences, and this is why they said that Pakistanis are overrepresented. I think it was 75% of all prosecuted under the type 1 offences in 2013. But I don't know if they've broken it down by gang-based grooming to then add a racial and religious aggravated charge on top of that, because I think Robert Jenrick was saying something about making that a component when he was campaigning at the last leadership election. So I think there might be room to change the law there. However, in any event, we know what the motivations are, and I think it's also more important at the moment that the politicians are transparent about the motivations, because they are still reluctant and still deny, as Lucy Powell did, that this is even a component in the first place. Like we can't move forward to get the politicians to change the law if they don't agree with the original premises of what the law needs to be changed to reflect.
And I suppose it's interesting, a feature of our reckless experiment with mass immigration in the first place, that funnily enough, there weren't actually any provisions in common law for dealing with this kind of offence before we'd embarked on this project.
Bit of an oversight by the wit out there.
Exactly. Didn't come up.
Yeah.
And so I imagine it's not in statute law either. So all that reflects is the fact that we didn't used to be this kind of society, and when you become a certain kind of society that you weren't before, your legal framework needs to evolve to meet that those new challenges. So in principle, I would very much be in favour of a change in the law. Another thing that worth talking about is that one thing Rupert Lowe has been talking about in tremendous detail. You've recently collaborated with Lowe, as I understand it, on an 11-page rough framework on how mass deportations could be done in this country. What can be done to deport foreigners who have been accused of mass rape and torture, even if they are technically British citizens? Because many of them, I would imagine, are eligible for citizenship elsewhere, and so we wouldn't actually be rendering them stateless by deporting them, so long as we lean on Pakistan in the right ways. And of course, many other countries in the world, they do have citizenship laws that are jus sanguinis rather than jus soli. That is to say, it is defined by like parentage and heritage, and so lots of Pakistanis living here are eligible for citizenship in Pakistan. That's why we were able to get rid of
I think you look at the conversation when it comes to dual nationals. I think there's a very clear case, obviously, because they literally hold in something that most people would recognise as a citizenship. But I think when it comes to those that have been given citizenship in this country, whether because they've been here for 10 years or because they were born here, you're absolutely right that there are those countries of origin from which their kind of ancestry or they themselves have arrived from, in many cases do provide for the identification of that individual with that country.
Exactly.
And therefore there is almost a kind of something to step into that void if it were to be revoked. I think that's probably a conversation that I can't see us getting towards for quite a while.
Us as a country.
As a country, yeah. I think there's something that really, really should be considered. I think, look, when you think about the way that our citizenship laws have worked for so long, it's effectively created one tier for everyone. You've got a piece of paper. There's no difference between someone that can trace their ancestry back here hundreds, thousands of years, or someone that's arrived for 6 years and been given a bit of paper. And what we really need to do when it comes to our citizenship is to start realising that there's a need to create almost a tier type list and a recognition that some people are here and almost on a scale of citizen greater or lesser than another individual. I don't think we're there quite yet.
Yeah, well, this has happened in the past. I mean, there used to be an ambiguity in British law that existed by virtue of the fact that cheap commercial travel didn't really exist. So there was nothing before 1962, when this law was hastily changed, but given that we were all technically subjects of the Crown, including members of subjects in our imperial in the imperial periphery who had never set foot in Britain but qualified as British subjects, our border security were in law incapable of distinguishing from someone who had been to, like an English person who'd been to France for the weekend and then wanted to come back through the port at Dover, and someone from Bhutan or someone from Bangladesh come flying in once commercial travel became possible in the post-war period. And so that was swiftly changed to draw a distinction between being a subject of the Crown and being a citizen of Britain. So we only really got the concept of British citizenship in our law in the early 1960s, and then Thatcher got rid of the concept of birthright citizenship in 1983. One of the best and often neglected things that she did. So there is a precedent in recent political history here for us drawing these kinds of two-tier distinctions.
Exactly,
two-tier has a bad rap at the moment is the term, but
I think unfortunately, I know I agree with you completely, and that is something that we do need to be working towards. I think too many people at the moment think citizenship is almost, some legal status that has existed since the dawn of time, the current setup that it has. And then therefore, once it's bestowed on someone, it's there, it's entrenched. There's nothing that can be done about it. These things are all based in law, and laws can change, and therefore we need to recognise that the apparatus, if need be, the framework can be shifted, and frankly should be shifted.
Yeah, that sort of fourth anthropology of citizenship came up again last week when Liberal Democrat MP Vera Hobhouse sponsored the launch of a paper by the Migration Democracy Project that says there's 4.4 million unenfranchised migrants in the UK, presumably counting all the illegals that have come over on a boat or overstayed their visa. The word unenfranchised, the premise of it is that man sort of starts with a natural right to the ballot box, and so the hidden hand of oppression, presumably the very brown hand of Rishi Sunak that is somehow acting on behalf of white supremacy, revoked this right away from them, and it's up to the benevolent Lib Dems, enlightened to man's freedom and equality, to give it back to them.
You see all the time.
Crucially, of course, just if I may say quickly, it's not a right that is universally upheld. It's a right to our ballot box, and our ballot box alone, and it never applies the other way. There's never an expectation that I should be allowed to vote in India's elections or anything like that.
Well, of course, we've got the biggest electorate in the world, haven't we?
Well, exactly.
Yeah, which is absolutely phenomenal loophole. Crazy situation there with the Commonwealth citizens. But I think it's something that the left and the Liberals have really got themselves tied into a right bind when it comes to citizenship. You have debates with individuals about whether a foreign-born individual should be able to claim benefits if they've been given a bit of paper after 6 years saying that they're a British citizen. And, you know, as far as these individuals are concerned, they are just as much of this country as someone that was born here and can trace back their lineage for centuries.
Fraser Nelson position.
Yeah, quite. I think there's something that Farage toyed with in a speech he gave in Dover about a kind of a contract with individuals looking to achieve citizenship is something that I think actually perhaps opens the window for this kind of delineation between different stratas of citizenship. The idea that their kind of holding of that status is conditional upon certain measures being met is something that is actually would be quite transformative given the current conception of how citizenship is, which is once you've got it, you're the same as everyone else.
Well, so if it would that someone had come up with that idea before the experiment rather than halfway through it.
Well, exactly, yes.
It might have been wise. Another thing worth mentioning as well, I think another way of getting people on side with this is pointing out that this has already happened in the case of Shamima Begum.
I was about to say.
She was born in this country, and logistically it was easher because she had already voluntarily left the country, so it was a matter of not letting her back in rather than trying to get rid of her, which presumably under Article 3 and under Article 8 of the ECHR, as applied by our domestic courts and in Strasbourg, would have made it very difficult to get rid of her. But since that she had already self-deported effectively without meaning exactly to do that, it's just a matter of not letting her back in. But she was born here. She is a British citizen or was a British citizen. She had that citizenship revoked. And the reason why we were able to do that legally, consistent with our international obligations, because we weren't rendering her stateless, because under the jus sanguinis, which just means like inherited by blood, in Latin, under the jus sanguinis legal framework of citizenship in Bangladesh, she wasn't even necessarily a citizen of Bangladesh. She was just eligible for citizenship in Bangladesh, and that was considered sufficient to get rid of her.
Yeah, well, and there's all kinds of measures like that. You know, if we look at our indefinite leave to remain, which is basically a proxy kind of citizenship, a gateway to citizenship, and the kind of measures by which that can currently be revoked, which is, you know, a period of absence from the UK for a few months, kind of certain requirements around access to public funds and things like that. There are measures if we are to move towards a sort of tiered citizenship, there are measures you can put in place that would allow individuals that have been given British citizenship, whether it's by being born here as a second generation or having arrived here, given after 6 years, you can put these measures in place that kind of mean that if they were to choose to return to their country of origin for a period of months, they'd be doing so in the knowledge that they would be forfeiting it.
Exactly.
And therefore you can kind of almost put the measures in place that allow them to voluntarily relinquish it as well.
Particularly if they were given refugee status here. As I like to joke, that it wasn't very common for Jewish people who made it to Britain to holiday in Nuremberg, whereas a lot of in the Second World War, but often we do get cases of immigrants holidaying in the homelands that they've supposedly fled from.
Specifically Afghanistan, in the case of Germany. You've got all the single male asylum seekers from Afghanistan since the Taliban took over, and presumably they're hopping back to Kabul to go on the dodgems with them.
Well, the idea that we're giving citizenship to individuals that have come here as refugees anyways, you know, defeats the whole purpose of what the Refugee Convention defines it as well. You know, it's meant to be a temporary, fleeting thing. Why? Yeah. Anyway, the whole absolute mess.
As you know as well, and because you've done work on this with Rupert, and everyone should read it, it's very accessible, very easy to read, 11-page report on mass deportation. Again, it's not like a fully fledged white paper, but it's a sketch of the direction in which we should be going as a country on mass deportations.
Just on illegal immigrants, on the illegal migrants, you know, foreign nationals, what we were just discussing there as well. There are other elements that we need to. This is far from the kind of panacea silver bullet. It's just the start of, you know, the address those 1.2 million that we know are here illegally.
Yes. But another thing that the Telegraph reported on recently is that these sort of gig economy employers like Deliveroo, Just Eat and Uber Eats have been found to be making use of illegal immigrant labour on a systematic scale. Many of these illegal immigrants, Telegraph found, have been making £500 a day, which roughly adds up to about $24,000 a year, which isn't a huge amount, but it's more than many British people.
Well, it is when you're not paying tax, have no overheads like rent.
Exactly.
Well, you should have been tipped off when it says Kelly will deliver your food in half an hour, 45 minutes. Abdul shows up.
Yeah, exactly. Because something in the system is going wrong here, and so what do you think we can do to deal with that? Because obviously there's a huge pull factor there, and I've read as well the Telegraph reports that they have spent some time with some of these smugglers, not least in Turkey, and they make Britain sound like a very attractive destination, free hotel, bed and breakfast, easy to work. All you really need is a phone to work and a bicycle, and you can make money on the black market untaxed, and you've got no overheads. What can we do to just crack down on that and make sure that sort of behaviour on the part of employers is just punishable in ways that make it unthinkable that they would engage in that action?
So at the moment, we're far too lenient with employers hiring people that are here illegally. The fines that we issue, I think it's about £45,000 per person, and that's only if they're detected, which is in very few instances. So I think we need to see a massive increase. I think it's a 3 or 4-fold increase, quite frankly, in the fines that we levy to those hiring illegal immigrants, whether that be car washes or Deliveroo drivers. I then think we also, if this is to be part of a proper deportation plan of illegal immigrants, we need to recognise that the Home Office can't do this alone. There needs to be a big push, a big public awareness push on current mechanisms that the public have access to report those that they suspect to be working illegally or those to be residing in the country illegally. At the moment, we have a kind of reporting line for commodities and immigration abuse, which has seen a huge uptick in recent years. It's, in 2019, we saw about 60,000 reports of people working illegally, and last year it was about 83,000. Okay. So there's clearly a recognition, there's a pattern there of individuals reporting illegal immigrants, and whether that's indicative of an increased population or just more people being aware of it. But I'd like to see a lot more money put on that. I'd actually also like to see, quite frankly, on these Uber Eats apps, these Deliveroo apps, some disclaimer, some messaging that says if you suspect that your worker is not who it was, then please report this to the Home Office using these contact details.
Could we make reporting mandatory like the Swedes have done? Because that's one thing that's accelerated the departure of their illegal migrants, is that you're not actually allowed to hire illegal immigrants, and the onus is on the employer to report their own employees if they suspect them to be working.
Well, the problem is when we had the hostile environment, which was barely a hostile environment actually, it was more like a passive-aggressive environment. It basically it said to landlords, it said to kind of employers, do a check on this individual. If they don't have the right to work, then you just can't employ them. It didn't actually then put the pressure on them to report them to the Home Office. So I think there needs to be that extra step added if we're to reheat the hostile environment, which actually requires those individuals that have access, employers, landlords have access to Home Office databases that they use to check these individuals. If you've got someone sat in front of you and they've given over a CV or they've given over some paperwork that gives their address, then you have to have a legal obligation to report them. I think that needs to be an essential part, because where it was, we were seeing a very small number of people that the Home Office suspected to be in the country illegally. They had about 500,000 names of individuals. If they were to be encountered by the state, by employers, by landlords, they wouldn't get reported. They would just simply have a driving licence revoked or something like that.
And another huge incentive, I was thinking about this on the train earlier actually, not just to levy enormous fines on, like to, as you say, maybe quadruple the fine that's currently used per illegal immigrant being illicitly hired when the employer has good reason, has not done all the necessary checks to make sure that is not happening. If you were simply to say that if you do report an incident like this, you will get 25% of that fine.
Yes,
that will go straight into your pocket. That would give people a huge incentive. If Kelly is supposed to be showing up in 10 minutes and Abdul shows up, not only do you get nice cheap food, you can then get 25% of the proceeds that come from reporting that incident about Deliveroo to the Home Office. They're deported, and Deliveroo fined a certain amount. You get some money.
And that's something this government are already pushing for when it comes to money laundering. They're already saying, if you report a money launderer, you get a certain percentage of the proceeds. I'd like to think the British public would be sort of willing to report these individuals in the country illegally.
Sure. If they work for COVID, they're certainly going to for illegal migrants.
Well, that's true, but I think we need to do as much as we can to basically turn the apparatus of the state and to sort of enable and rile up the British public to actually engage in this process as well, because we can't just have, 5,000 employees in immigration enforcement at the moment. No. They're not going to be able to do it. It's just simply impossible for them to do it themselves. So if we want to actually embark on this mass deportation of illegals program, then we need to really warm up every organ and every limb that we've got at our disposal.
And what, in your view, Rob, would be the practical steps for doing similar thing with private landlords that we were just talking about with employers? Because I suppose that's another way in which a lot of private landlords like having illegal immigrants, because they make more compliant tenants because they have every incentive to keep their heads down.
Yeah, so I think that's where we really need to bring in the local councils. If you look at the uptick that we're seeing in houses of multiple occupation, which of course are one of the key hotbeds where illegal migrants reside, these are the kind of places that local councils are much more likely to have an awareness of them operating without proper registration than, say, a central government department. And therefore that's something that we need to be really getting in touch with councils about. We need to have them ideally corresponding with pretty much every landlord. If you think about it, they're sending every landlord council tax notices. They're sending them kind of updates on tenancies.
So they know when they are.
Yeah, exactly. They have an awareness of who is renting out buildings. They have an awareness of who is not, it's not an owner-occupied tenancy in many instances, and therefore they have the wherewithal, they have the mailing list, they have the data to start engaging with these people. At the very start, you need to just be at the very least sending out a nudge letter, just letting these people know, this is now going to be one of our key priorities. And this is the kind of thing that I would like to see these new reform-run councils starting to engage with, ideally from day one, which is to, take a kind of stock take of where the HMOs are, where do we think there are areas actually that are operating HMOs but aren't registered as HMOs, and start engaging with them at the very least as a nudge letter. And then you need to start getting on the phone to immigration enforcement as well.
What about councils that are not, say, reform or perhaps conservative owned? But presumably, given that councils already have the power to do this, they're not doing it. How would a motivated central government encourage councils not willing to do this to do it?
I think, we do need to push as much of this down as possible. You're absolutely right. In the London boroughs, for instance, are going to be kind of now and impossible to require them to do this. But, that's then when you have to actually have that upscaled immigration enforcement department with extra staffing, calling in the data, because data is key for this. Just knowing where people are, having any details you can of them, even if it's a kind of, they lived here 6 months ago, is at least a start. And that's where you do need to have specialised teams within the immigration enforcement getting involved, getting in touch with those London councils, demanding that they provide a register list of HMOs, demanding they provide lists of kind of reports of noise disturbance or unusual activity, suspicious activity, and just pulling that all in centrally, processing it. And, it's not just councils either. It's, of course, NHS, it's GPs as well. If you look at some areas of the country where the GP registrations far exceed the number of people that were living there in the census. It was the same with vaccinations. We saw during COVID, some areas had a 110% vaccination rate. So we kind of have an idea of the hotspots as well. So they would be a cushion. They would be a good starting point, I think.
Yeah, okay. And another point that's often made that I think is completely true and well worth mainstreaming actually about not just mass illegal immigration, but mass legal immigration as well, is that whereas the costs of this are heavily socialized onto the people at large, the benefits, to the extent that there are any benefits whatsoever, are heavily privatized. In other words, they really do go into the coffers of these private landlords and of these sort of rogue, cynical, craven employers. But one of the ways in which it imposes a huge cost on us isn't just socially and demographically and in all these terms that the NCF is keen to talk about, but in economic and fiscal terms, exactly the sort of criteria that is often used to justify this project in the first place. I mean, it used to be one of the key pillars in the mass immigration argument that, well, yes, it may cause some problems with social cohesion. When they would admit that, they might say that. But economically, it's a boon to the nation. It helps GDP go up. I think you're doing work at the moment on the extent to which mass immigration, both legal and illegal, saddles us with a huge welfare bill. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, and how do you think that we can go about taking away that incentive for immigrants to come here and to live off the largesse of the British people? Yeah,
so I think, first of all, illegal immigrants it's relatively, although we don't have the number, it's relatively easy to gauge that they are probably going to be a fiscal cost and that they're not paying tax, but there might be a consuming products in which they have to pay VAT upon. But in general, the expenditure on waste management, on policing, on transport and things like that are going to be setting us back quite a bit. So if we take the Pew estimate, the 2017 Pew estimate of the illegal migrant population, and work out roughly that an illegal migrant is costing us between £2,000 and £7,000 a year, just in terms of that consumption of public good, not including social welfare or anything like that, then we're probably looking at a bill of around about £5 billion just on those here illegally, and that's before we even get into
the hotels or anything.
The asylum system, and then those in the asylum system using the healthcare as well. So it's a huge number, and I think that's why it's not my favourite way of having to talk about why we need to address the illegal immigration problem, but I think it's one that reflects the fact that tackling this isn't just something that is the right thing to do and something that would restore a bit of pride to our nation and secure our borders and a bit of sovereignty. Heaven forbid we actually have that. But it would actually, save us money in the long run. It's a long-term investment. On the legal migration front, if you look at since 2021, when we had, all manner of ridiculous visa routes introduced, chiefly among them the health and social care visa. If you kind of look at the profile of those individuals being awarded certificates of sponsorship, which are basically a component part of a visa, you see that between 21 and 23, the average salary fell by about £10,000 of a migrant. So, we know that the OBR has said that a low-wage migrant costs just several £1,000s each year. I mean, what is it over the course of their lifetime?
£465,000 by the age of life expectancy, which is 81, and that's if they arrive at 25 and work. That's not accounting for if they're born second generation,
or their dependents.
Yes.
And then what we're also looking at to try and enlarge that conversation, because frankly, I think they're underselling the scale of the problem quite significantly.
Who are, sorry?
The OBR with their projection, because of course they claim that someone coming into the UK on a median wage is, an economic boon from the day one, and will be until they reach the age of 80, a net positive contribution. You look at the underlying data of that, and they're assuming these people coming in on sort of £35,000 salaries are paying £22,000 in tax or something like that. There's like a hugely ridiculous data flaw as far as I'm concerned in that as well.
They're just writing personal checks to HMRC, presumably.
Well, clearly, yeah. I honestly, I do think the OBR, the Treasury, just pluck these numbers out of thin air sometimes. So what we're trying to do is to get back to the fact that, there was a report in 2018 that the MAC produced, the Migration Advisory Committee, that said a migrant earning less than £38,000 a year is a net fiscal cost at every stage of their life, because many times they bring dependents with them, but just their consumption of public services as well.
That was pre-COVID inflation as well.
Exactly. So it would be, in the mid-40,000 a year is a net fiscal cost. And that makes sense when you think about the fact that, I think it's about 55% of UK households are actually like a net drain on the exchequer as well. So that kind of works out right about 45,000 being the point that you break even with the Treasury. And you look at the visas we've been handing out over the last 2 or 3 years, about 70% of them are earning way, way, way below what that break even point is. So there's a huge fiscal cost there.
I think Carl Williams calculated that 95% of all visas and well over half of skilled worker visas were on less than half the median wage. So they would be net fiscal.
Yes, of course. Yes. So that 70% is just the work visas. Of course, you're absolutely right. Yeah, that's not before we start taking into consideration the other routes that are open for exploitation. But then, of course, there's the more hard to measure metrics. There's the kind of strain on capital stock. There's the just general feeling of the place being crowded. There's the wage suppression, which is quite a difficult thing to actually properly gauge where we would be in a hypothetical situation without mass migration, as well. The increase in crime, which of course comes with huge cost as well,
And the likelihood that they may not only bring dependents with them, but may have more children once here, and those children may replicate that indolence, and then start costing the exchequer themselves over the course of their lifetime. So there are these considerations as well. I will ask you this one last question before we go to members' questions, because some of our members have sent in questions for you personally, Rob. Do you think that this is going to happen? Do you think that some comprehensive, not soon by the Labour Party, but that some comprehensive policy of mass deportations will be adopted at some point in the next decade, of the kind that we're envisioning here?
I think it will have to. I think the fiscal pressures will grow to such an extent, but I also think that the public resentment towards politicians will just mean that any government coming in 2029 will have to make a key part of their platform the removal of all illegal immigrants, and then was starting the process to unfurl some of the damage done by legal migration as well, the sort of scrapping of indefinite leave to remain, the reviewing of the status of those that have already got it as well. So I don't think that the conversation is going to go away as much as politicians would wish it will. Of course, we have the white paper later this month, which I think will do nothing to actually deal with the systemic problems, and therefore by the time we reach 2029 we could be in a real boiling point.
Slither of hope there, even if we have to go through a fair bit of grief.
No pain,
no pain, no gain, indeed. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining us, Rob. We have questions from members now, but thank you for joining us up to this point. Thank you as well, Connor, and thank you for staying with us. If you'd like to catch Rob's answers to your questions, do make sure to sign up as an NCF member on our website. But for now, thank you for watching, and we shall see you next week.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.